Tonight, emotion from Nicola Sturgeon at the COVID inquiry. The former First Minister denies decisions were taken for political reasons and says a large part of her wishes she had not been in charge when the pandemic struck.
I wanted to be the best First Minister I could be during that period. It's for others to judge the extent to which I succeeded.
Questioned about missing WhatsApp messages, she said everything of relevance was available on public record. And one of her biggest regrets, that she didn't lock down Scotland earlier.
2 years of the most difficult decisions since devolution, condensed into just 1 day of the closest scrutiny here at the COVID inquiry.
Also making the headlines, plans to reform how rape cases are dealt with in Scottish courts. Starting early, a new scheme in Glasgow's nursery schools hoping to give kids a better chance in later life. And in sports, Celtic agree a deal to sign Norwich City striker Adam Ida on loan.
I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John McKai in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6.
Good evening from St Andrew's House in Edinburgh. When COVID arrived on our doorstep, key decisions were made which affected all of our lives. And this is where the First Minister and her team made many of those decisions. Nicola Sturgeon held her daily televised briefings here. You'll remember them. And it's also where the emergency group called SCORE would meet when matters were at their most critical. Well, today at the UK COVID inquiry, Nicola Sturgeon faced a raft of questions on how those decisions were made. She admitted she'd deleted WhatsApp messages and became tearful when telling the inquiry a large part of her wished she hadn't been in charge when the pandemic struck. Well, our political reporter Laura Alderman watched the day's events unfold.
She was at the helm throughout the pandemic, at the heart of decision-making, and at this stage of the COVID-19 inquiry's hearings, the key witness. Facing a gruelling full day of questioning, Nicola Sturgeon promised to answer directly and openly. But the issue of her missing WhatsApp messages dominated the start.
Because you deleted them, hadn't you?
I didn't retain them in line with the procedure I've already talked about.
Are you creating a distinction between deletion and retaining?
No.
You had deleted them, had you not?
I think deletion, I think, forgive me, I think sounds as if it was a sort of, not bothering to check whether any information was being retained. I was very thorough, and not just in the pandemic, but in all my work in government, to ensure that things were appropriately recorded.
Did you delete them?
Yes.
She also reflected on actions that she wished she'd taken sooner.
Of the many regrets I have, probably chief of those is that we didn't lock down a week, 2 weeks earlier.
During her evidence today, the former First Minister often made reference to the magnitude of decisions and the frenetic pace at which they were being made during the early stages of the pandemic. She added she often felt overwhelmed, but would carry the impact of those decisions for the rest of her life.
Did you consider yourself, against that background and your considerable ministerial experience, to be precisely the right First Minister for the job?
No, that's not how I would have thought of it at all. I was the First Minister when the pandemic struck. There's a large part of me wishes that I hadn't been, but I was, and I wanted to be the best First Minister I could be.
Previous evidence suggested she had irritated Boris Johnson and breached confidentiality of a COBRA meeting in March 2020 by announcing a ban on mass gatherings in Scotland before the rest of the UK.
The public on that day, I remember, were desperate for information. I guess I was surprised that I spoke before him, not because I went too quickly, because I was surprised at the time I did it, he hadn't. The whole notion of confidentiality is a bit absurd.
The inquiry was then shown Cabinet minutes from June 2020.
It was agreed that consideration should be given to restarting work on independence and a referendum, with the arguments reflecting the experience of the coronavirus crisis and developments on EU exit. The Cabinet agreed on that date, did they not, to seek to promote the cause of Scottish independence by politicising the pandemic?
No, I respectfully don't think that is a fair or accurate reading of that.
It's agreed, it's not a comment. It's an agreement by Cabinet.
But agreed that consideration should be given. What I meant is if somebody had come to me afterwards and said, we've done this process of consideration and we now think we should restart work in independence, I would have said, I don't want to do that. And I would have said to Cabinet, let's not do that because it's not the right time to do that. But I think more materially, that didn't happen.
Her evidence then ended with an emotional message.
Sorry to each and every bereaved person and each and every person who suffered in other ways. I did my best, my government did our best, and people will judge that.
A day for Miss Sturgeon back in the media spotlight and under scrutiny. But was it enough to give the inquiry and the public the answers they were looking for? Laura Alderman, STV News, Edinburgh.
So that's how today's evidence wrapped up. But for those whose lives were turned upside down, whose family lives were shattered, whose businesses never recovered from the pandemic, what did they make of today's evidence? Well, our political correspondent, Ewan Petrie, has been assessing the reaction.
Outside the inquiry, bereaved relatives gave their verdict on a day of evidence from Nicola Sturgeon.
We're still no clearer on the nature, the provision of clinical advice to Ms Sturgeon as the former First Minister and her Cabinet.
While these questions remain, there is a thirst for more information on the measures taken.
I think she engendered a degree of trust in the Scottish population that has now been lost completely.
I think a lot of people believed in her, and now I think she's really let us down badly.
Leslie caught COVID the week before the first lockdown in March 2020. For her, the evidence is made for difficult listening.
I'm angry and upset. At the way we've been kind of abandoned. That's how I see it sometimes. I think I had trust that things would be done the right way.
I am now asking restaurants, cafes, pubs, gyms and cinemas to close.
The hospitality sector had to deal with fast-moving changes. It, like many others, is still recovering.
There's been a few WhatsApp exchanges that, have sort of got the hairs on the back of my neck up and was like, I wish you'd come and walked a mile in my shoes during that time and seen how hard it was when actually the decisions, were we being guided by the science? What were we being guided by?
Decisions were often taken quickly, including the closure of schools. Teachers hope lessons will be learned.
We, as citizens, need to have confidence that going forward, if something like this was to happen again, that everything would be in place and we won't have nurses using bin bags and you won't have teachers going around delivering mattresses because their learners don't have places to sleep.
This inquiry may have shed some light on decision-making. It's also raised questions over trust, which may prove tougher to answer. Ewan Petrie, STV News.
Well, our political editor, Colin McKai, joins us now from outside the inquiry. Colin, a big build-up today, wasn't there?
Absolutely. We've had 3 weeks of evidence to the UK COVID inquiry here in Edinburgh, and today was really the culmination of that, the cross-examination of the key decision maker in Scotland during the pandemic. Throughout that, Nicola Sturgeon said that the buck stopped with her, and she repeated that several times today. Now, I got 2 things out of her evidence today that I hadn't really heard before. One was that she regretted not locking down maybe a week or 2 weeks earlier, and I think that's particularly particularly significant for people who might not have caught COVID in those early weeks of it. If that had happened, they might not still, some of them might still not be suffering ill health now. Some of them might not have lost loved ones if that had been the case. And also the second one on care home visiting, where she admitted that she got a lot of that wrong. But most of today's questioning was about the process of the decision making, not the decisions themselves. A lot of it was about the deleted WhatsApps, and that's certainly something that the opposition have been focusing on.
Nicola Sturgeon should be apologising for destroying vital evidence. Nicola Sturgeon should be apologising for misleading the press and the public about deleting those messages. Nicola Sturgeon should be apologising for breaking a clear promise to be open. Nicola Sturgeon should be apologising for her secrecy, her dishonesty and her arrogant disregard for transparency.
I think so many of us, regardless of which political persuasion we were, turned to Nicola Sturgeon through that pandemic to steer us through, and to now see that she evaded the scrutiny of this inquiry in terms of providing information, lied to journalists and the public about the transparency she would show to the inquiry, and perhaps has even broken the law, both in terms of complying with the inquiry and also attempting to breach FOI laws, I think frankly is a breaking of the trust and a betrayal of the trust the people of Scotland put in her.
There are often decisions that have to be made that are a judgment call, and as First Minister, that's the job. You've got to make the judgment. And I have to say, having worked in really close quarters with the former First Minister, I can tell you right now, not only did she absolutely work her socks off day in and day out, she did it for one reason and one reason only. She did it to protect the Scottish public. Did she get everything right? Did we get everything right? Absolutely not. Nobody's saying that within government, and we've got to learn the lessons, and that's the importance of the public inquiry.
So opposition reaction there and thoughts of the First Minister. Colin, what did you make of it all today?
It was absolutely fascinating at times. I don't think I've ever seen Nicola Sturgeon quite so publicly emotional, particularly when she was being questioned on her motivation for the decisions, and when she was recalling the real horror of what you heard earlier, the magnitude of the life and death decisions that our government was having to make. Now, she admitted and defended deleting the WhatsApp. She didn't apologise, as Douglas Ross was calling for there, but I didn't feel there was any real gotcha moment today. But I did feel that Jamie Dawson, the KC, was trying to get something like that out of Nicola Sturgeon. But as I said at the start of the COVID inquiry, I don't think any politician's going to come out of this well, and you saw that with the booing of Nicola Sturgeon as she left.
All right, Colin, for the moment, thank you. Now, though, let's cross over to John for the rest of the day's news and sport.
Kellyanne, thank you. The Lord Advocate says plans to change the size of juries and the proportion of jurors required to gain a guilty verdict are very concerning. Dorothy Bain argued it'll make more difficult to secure convictions. Louise Mickey reports.
The Victims, Witnesses and Justice Reform Bill is aiming to improve Scotland's criminal justice system, particularly in cases of rape and other sexual offences. One major piece of the bill is the scrapping of the controversial not proven verdict, though it also proposes reducing jury sizes from 15 to 12, albeit still requiring 8 jurors to support a conviction in order to reach a guilty verdict. But Scotland's most senior prosecutor has warned there's profound concerns about that.
If you're going to increase the percentage of individuals that you require for a verdict of a guilty vote, you are going to make it far more challenging to secure a guilty verdict in a system that requires corroboration. I think it would erode public confidence in the justice system to go ahead with the 2/3 majority proposal. We have profound concerns about it. There should be provisions for the Crown to seek the authority of the court for a retrial where a majority is not reached.
Judges outlined to the Justice Committee that there would also be concerns should the majority be permitted to be any lower.
Let's say one vote swing either way. It may be difficult to say that this case has been proved beyond reasonable doubt when so many people out of that jury have found that there is a reasonable doubt.
The bill will move to the amendment stage this spring, with the prospect of juryless trials for rape cases remaining a hotly contested topic. Louise Mickey, STV News.
Storm Ingun has brought travel disruption to much of the country. The wet and windy weather halted many ScotRail services and stopped most of CalMac's ferry sailings. Gusts of more than 50 miles per hour were detected in the Central Belt and 70 miles per hour on South Uist. XL bully dogs will be banned in Scotland from late July unless owners have applied for an exemption certificate. The Scottish Government also says the first safeguards will come into force in just over 3 weeks, requiring the dogs to be muzzled and kept on a lead in public. Similar controls are being introduced in England and Wales. To more stories in the West, and a jury has heard the Emma Caldwell murder suspect was as white as a sheet after being interviewed by a TV journalist about the killing. Ian Packer was said to have commented to a woman he knew afterwards, "They're blaming me for Emma." The witness, who alleges she was previously attacked by the accused, told the High Court in Glasgow he changed his story about his whereabouts at the time Miss Caldwell went missing. Ian Packer denies murder and 45 other charges. A man who abducted and sexually assaulted a young girl while dressed as a woman has failed in his bid to have his sentence reduced. Andrew Miller, who also uses the name Amy George, was jailed for 20 years in October last year. Judges rejected Miller's appeal, saying the sentence was not excessive. A man has admitted impersonating a nurse at a hospital. 28-year-old Lee Woods wore NHS clothing and a badge at Glasgow's Queen Elizabeth Hospital between March and July last year. Whilst at the site, he attended the resuscitation and children's areas. Glasgow is the first city in Scotland to launch a groundbreaking early years programme designed to prevent harmful behaviours in later life. Think Equal uses stories to teach critical thinking, empathy and how to manage emotions during formative years, as Brandon Cook reports.
At school she played with lots of friends.
Story time with a difference. These 3- and 4-year-olds don't realise it yet, but they're taking part in Think Equal. It's a programme for nursery children teaching values and behaviours which will stand them in good stead for later life.
It's about children being able to talk about their emotions and talking freely through the medium of their stories. So the stories allow the children to talk about, express themselves. So if you're feeling really angry and you're only 3 and you don't know what angry feels like, so it's allowing children to talk about that and it's giving them understanding. So it's really supportive in that way.
The 30-week programme focuses on 25 critical skills children should learn in their formative years, like dealing with setbacks and managing emotions or impulsive behaviours.
This programme is about prevention. We've made huge mistakes as a world. We've come in too late, and we've come in with little plasters over festering, deep wounds. You cannot fix the world that way. You can't come in when the violence has already taken place and react to it. It's a stupid way to go about things. There's no other word for it.
Think Equal's creators claim their programme could be the catalyst for lower crime rates amongst young people in the coming decades. Scotland's Violence Reduction Unit are backing the scheme.
This programme will get to the heart of some of those challenges by supporting our youngest children at a very early stage when their brains are developing. And we hope, like in the previous years of the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, to continue to have an impact by working across the lifespan for children.
Glasgow City Council hopes success will lead to a wider rollout.
It's just another layer on top of our already existing nurturing approaches that nurseries and schools do, particularly with children, as I said, in their younger years, and hopefully that by the time they reach adult age or high school age, then they'll have those skills equipped to deal with life's challenges and develop good and positive relationships.
Brandon Cook, STV News, Glasgow.
Before the sport, a monkey update. The Japanese macaque, which escaped from a wildlife park in the Highlands, is spending a 4th day on the run, despite keepers spotting him in new drone footage. The Highland Wildlife Park say they were able to identify and follow the monkey yesterday for 45 minutes, but that they were not in a position to bring him in safely. Now to the sport. And
don't you dare.
I was going to talk about the Thai match.
Well, I lead, you follow, John. Good evening to all. Aberdeen are searching for a new manager after Barry Robson was sacked. Robson lost his job following the club's draw against Dundee last night, a result which leaves the Dons in 8th place in the Premiership. Chris Harvey is at Pittodrie.
Good evening from Pittodrie, where the Dons are looking for their 4th manager in less than 3 years. It seems incredible after Derek McInnes left here in March 2021. Jim Goodwin, Stephen Glass and now Barry Robson have all been sacked after failing to deliver on Dave Cormack, the owner's significant multi-million-pound investment. Well, Aberdeen sit 18 points behind third place Hearts and lie a lowly 8th in the Premiership table. And after last night's drab 1-1 draw with Dundee, it seems like the board and the fan base had fallen out of love with their former player. It all seemed so different last year, but last night, Barry Robson, he was certainly aware of the pressure the fans were putting him under.
They will sing these songs, that's all right. I accept that. I signed up for this job. The pressure's always going to come in this job for me, and that's it, that's fine, that's what happens.
Well, who are the runners and riders? One incredible name that's emerged this afternoon is that of 75-year-old Neil Warnock. Perhaps possible to come in on a temporary basis until the end of the season to buy the board a bit of time to find a long-term solution. He's hugely experienced, 1,600 games as manager under his belt. He would be absolutely box office. The usual names as well being bandied around: Alec Neil, the former Hamilton manager, and of course Neil Lennon, who had that successful spell at Celtic. But it seems like the fan base are wanting something different, and Warnock would certainly deliver that.
Celtic have agreed a deal in principle with Norwich City to sign Adam Ida on loan until the end of the season. With more on this and a roundup of the rest of today's football news, here's Jamie Borthwick.
Brendan Rodgers is keen to bolster his attack, and he appears to have got his man. Celtic are close to finalising the loan of Norwich City striker Adam Ida until the end of the season. It's understood the champions don't have an option to buy the 22-year-old outright. Meanwhile, there was an injury scare for Reo Hatate at the Asian Cup. The midfielder was taken off in the first half of Japan's 3-1 victory over Bahrain. Hearts have got their man at last. Scott Fraser's loan from Charlton Athletic has gone through after a lengthy delay in paperwork. The midfielder joins the Tynecastle men until the end of the season. Livingston came from behind twice against Ross County last night, but the 2-2 draw keeps them 6 points adrift at the bottom of the table. James Penrice has opened talks with other clubs as he nears the end of his contract, but his commitment to the relegation battle isn't in question.
So James has been playing through injury to try and keep Livingston in the Premier League. So that shows you everything about the character and the personality of James. It means a lot to him. So I've got no qualms about this.
Derek McInnes has spoken with head of refereeing at Crawford Allen, seeking an explanation for Corey and Daba's red card at the weekend, but he wasn't happy with what he was told.
We're disappointed after that conversation, really, because I think they felt the decision was right rather than a mistake. His explanation was that the justification for the red card, so we totally disagreed on the reasons, but at least we had the conversation.
Meanwhile, Robbie Dees has had surgery on a broken cheekbone and will be missing for a number of weeks. Jamie Borthwick, STV News.
Tennis, and Andy Murray says he is not ready to quit. That's despite admitting being in a terrible moment. Murray's winless start to the year continued when he lost his first round match at the South of France Open. He lost at the same stage at the Australian Open earlier this month. A BBC article questioned if the Scot was damaging his legacy by continuing to play. But Murray hit back on social media, saying he'll keep fighting to produce performances he thinks he's capable of. And that, folks, is all your sport tonight. See you again tomorrow.
We know all about the winds today, so what's coming? Sean has the weather.
An icy start to the day will give way to a series of oohs and ahs. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Good evening. Well, it's certainly been wild, wet old Wednesday out there. Some heavy bursts of rain earlier on the day, those strong and gusty winds. The winds continuing to ease down as that big storm system moves its way into the Norwegian coast. A wild night to come for them. But our winds easing down. Showers continuing across northwestern parts, mainly the Highlands, Argyll and Bute. For most of us it will be dry, clear spells and a wee touch of frost, perhaps in a few wee sheltered valleys and glens of Ayrshire and also South Lanarkshire and the borders.
Now, tomorrow it should be a quieter day, certainly wind-wise. However, we will see more rain developing, driest and brightest across the south and the east early on the day, but we'll see rain developing. Most of that rain across northwestern parts, so turning very misty and murky, but the rain hopefully nothing overly heavy, just a very damp end to the day here. Drizzle outbreaks of rain developing across Ayrshire, Inverclyde, Renfrewshire and Glasgow by the end of the afternoon, and then that pushing eastwards across all parts during tomorrow evening. So a dry start for most of us tomorrow, damp by the end of the day, and unfortunately that's something we're going to have to get used to. Friday, Saturday we're going to hang on to showery outbreaks of rain coming in from the west, and here we'll also still hang on to the windiest conditions, especially across the Hebrides where we've still got the risk of gales as we head into the weekend. So still quite blustery at times over the next couple of days. Through the weekend, showery outbreaks of rain, nothing cold at least. Temperatures staying around double figures by day, 11 or 12 degrees Celsius. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Now back to Kellyanne at St Andrew's House in Edinburgh for more on today's main story.
Thanks very much, John. Well, it has been a big day here in Edinburgh, a lot to digest. Let's go straight back to our political editor, Colin McKai. So, Colin, just remind us, what have you made of the last few weeks of the UK COVID inquiry here in Scotland?
3 weeks of evidence here in Scotland, and it's really felt that the inquiry has been hung up on the process, looking more at the how rather than the why of some of the biggest decisions ever taken by a devolved government. It seemed obsessed with WhatsApps or the deletion of WhatsApps by Scottish Government ministers and officials. Now, don't get me wrong, they have a big problem there, and it could come back to bite them if there's a further investigation by the Information Commissioner. But you know, there were 3 hours of questioning of the former First Minister today about the process. Nothing about closing schools. Nothing from the inquiry QC about care homes. They had to wait for the families of the bereaved's lawyer to come back with that. But what I've not seen much of in this inquiry is something that's going to help governments in the future deal with a similar pandemic. And I don't think there's been enough answers from the bereaved families. But then there's a long way to go in this inquiry.
All right, Colin, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. So today we got a glimpse into some of the decisions which were made during the pandemic when Scotland was in the grip of the COVID pandemic. The UK inquiry finishes its evidence here in Scotland tomorrow before moving on. But from all of us here on the ground in a blustery Edinburgh and in the studio, good night.